Welcome, everybody, to the Pink Ribbon Roller Coaster. We're so glad you're joining us today. I am really excited that we have a special guest. Her name is Angie Ridings. She's a good friend of mine and of Project 31's. She's been around for years and years now, and I'm so grateful for her for multiple reasons. First of all, she is a two-time survivor herself, but she's also a licensed professional counselor, and she specializes in trauma and EMDR. And so today I've invited her on because I wanted to just talk about what is trauma. And so first, I just want to say thanks, Angie, for joining us.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So first, tell us a little bit about your story, just so they can have a little bit of understanding who you are.
Oh, well, my story. So, the first time I was diagnosed with breast cancer was in 2014, and then again 8 years later. And second time around, I opted to do the double mastectomy and full reconstruction, and have been slowly on the mend physically and emotionally. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah.
Well,
And I try and incorporate, a lot of my own experiences into the therapy room with my clients.
Well, and we are so grateful for you just because I know from my personal experience in going to counseling, it can be hard when you're working with a counselor that might not have a full understanding of what it is like to walk through the cancer journey. So you are definitely unique and special in that way. And I know that you've helped so many women in our community, and we're grateful for that. So also tell me, how did you get into counseling?
Well, it's a second career for me. I actually used to work in human resources and had a business degree and already had a master's in human relations and was doing different work. And I just felt like I was in the wrong profession. It just really felt like I was being called to something different. And so I quit my job and went back to school
Wow.
and had to get a whole different master's degree because I couldn't use my other one for therapy. So, yeah, I just took the plunge and felt like I needed to be doing this work instead, and this has been much more fulfilling.
That's awesome. I admire that you were willing to take that faith step because I know that that's not easy, especially when you already had an established career. So kudos to you, and especially seeing what you've been able to do now. So, like I said before, today we're going to talk about really what is trauma. So I know a lot of times, when we're in group sessions, we talk about trauma. We talk about how cancer can be a catalyst for trauma, but I think we throw that word around, and people might not necessarily understand what are we talking about? So, can you give us just some basic understanding of what that means?
Yeah. Well, the Latin root of trauma means wound. And so it's actually an experience that causes an emotional wound. And I really like Dr. Gabor Mate's definition of trauma. He says it's not what you go through that's the trauma, it's your internal experience as a result of an event. And so two people can experience the same exact thing, and only one of them might be traumatized by it. So it really just depends on your own personal response internally to what happens.
That's interesting. I didn't know that that was the root, the Latin root word was wound. That's very
Hmm.
interesting. And then
Yeah.
an interesting point too about how it's basically your perception of the experience, it sounds like. So, what does it mean? I know that I've heard different things about how trauma is triggered in the brain and kind of how it's processed. So, can you tell us on a neurological level what's happening whenever we experience trauma?
Yeah. Well, trauma memories are stored differently in the brain than regular memories. And I talk about this a lot in my EMDR talks that I do, my EMDR therapy talks, because traumatic memories cause us to have these responses on a nervous system level, and so it's something that we feel where we're re-experiencing the event over and over again. And memories are stored differently in such a way that it's hitting more in our limbic system, and our amygdala, and our ability to think rationally about what we're experiencing is completely overridden by these somatic responses we have. So, somatic means body. And so, trauma lives in your body too, and it lives in the tissue of our body.
Mm.
And so, when we're re experiencing something over and over and over again, it's not in the past. So, it's not stored in our long term memory, it's more in the present instead of the past. And so, those memories need extra attention. And sometimes talk therapy isn't quite enough to do that. And that's where other tools come in, like EMDR therapy or somatic experiencing therapy.
Okay, so how would we know when you said that if what we're experiencing now, how do we know if it's from this current experience or if it's from something that's been stored that we've been carrying? How can we differentiate?
Well, I would say it depends on the intensity of what you're feeling. And if it's something that happened, say, 20 years ago, and you're still having really strong responses to it as if it just happened, then it's definitely unresolved and it's stored differently in your brain and in your body. Um, if we have a current event and your body might have it associated with an old wound,
Mhm.
then that just compounds the traumatic response. And so trauma tends to stack up in layers. You can kind of think of it like that. And in therapy, we start to peel away the layers. So we might be dealing with an event that's in the present day, but it's also associated with an older situation that needs to be resolved as well for healing to happen on both ends.
Okay, so when you talk about what you're experiencing in your body, what are some of those potential reactions we may be having?
Yeah, so that's where I'm sure everybody's heard the term fight or flight.
Hmm.
Your body goes into fight or flight mode. So that's the alarm system that we all have built in. And our fight or flight system is telling us we're in danger. And what happens in trauma is, even when the event has passed, we might still be getting those alarm bells. And so we might feel like fight or flight. And then the more extreme response to a trauma is freeze. And so when we can't run away from danger, and when we can't fight our way out of a dangerous situation, we have nothing left to do but to freeze. And then we just try to preserve ourselves and we go to in complete survival mode. And so that's how you know in your body that something's happening is you feel this intense urge to fight, to run away, or you just feel completely frozen
Hmm.
and shut down.
Which I know for myself, I definitely felt that walking through this journey and newly diagnosed when it's all the unknowns. And then, once you get to the maybe your active treatment, or if you're going to be treating for um, the rest of your life, um, let's say we're in that survival state. What should we do?
Well, depends on what state you're in. Um, so we need to be able to complete the stress cycle. So there's a process that kicks in internally so that we can properly respond to a situation. So if we're in a car accident, um, and the car's on fire, you have to be able to respond quickly and get out of the car. Um, if we're being attacked, we have to be able to respond in such a way where we can either run away or fight back.
Hmm.
And when we're experiencing cancer, um, we have to fight for our survival in a lot of ways. And so that often looks like, um, going to all of our appointments and not avoiding. It might mean, taking care of ourselves in a way where we're able to rest and not forcing ourselves to overdo things.
Mm-hmm.
So it can look like all kinds of things, but um, if if we don't respond accordingly to what's happening, then life just happens to you, and then you're just a victim of your circumstances. And I know we've all felt that way. I certainly have.
Mm-hmm.
It's really easy when we get bad news to think, well, I I guess I just have to do this. But if you can find some strength inside and go, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do whatever it takes to take care of myself and to get through this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to look for support, and I'm going to get the rest I need, and I'm going to eat healthier. And so I don't know if that completely answered your question, but
No, it
just to
does,
kind
because I think sometimes when you made a good point, like life just happens to you unless you make a conscious effort to say, okay, no, I can control certain things and I can make certain choices for this to look
yeah,
different. Because I feel like obviously none of us would choose to walk through this. But I do think
right,
that we all have a sense of fight where you're fighting to control anything that you can. And so I felt like when you said that, that's a good thing to want to control. Is okay, I can choose to eat healthier. I can choose to be determined to get through this. But I know on the flip side of that, though, there might be some days where um, you're just not feeling that. You know what I mean? Or it's like a
sure.
hard day. So, um, like we say, obviously the pink ribbon roller coaster, that's where this roller coaster comes in. So, how do we, let's say that somebody just got newly diagnosed and they're kind of feeling this fight or flight response. What would you say to that woman?
I would say you didn't choose this situation, and it probably looks like all your options suck, and yet you still get to choose which option you go with. So in other words, yeah, you have to pick a sucky situation, but you like, for instance, when I got diagnosed the second time, the doctor that diagnosed me looked me in the eyes and said, Angie, I know it's easy to feel like you're helpless in this situation, but I want you to remember you still have choices, and you've got to focus on what choices you actually have.
That's good.
And it was such a good reminder to
Yeah.
me, because even a therapist in fight or flight is going to feel helpless
Hmm.
and freeze and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe the news I'm hearing.
Hmm.
And so her saying that to me meant everything, because it reminded me I'm not asking for this, and yet this is what's right in front of me, and I can choose to have surgery or not have surgery.
Hmm.
And I can choose what kind of surgery I want to have, and I can choose if I want reconstruction or not.
Hmm.
So it's really important, I think, to focus on the things that we truly do have control over in the midst of a really terrifying, helpless situation.
That's really a good suggestion. And it makes me think about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I know you had just mentioned that amygdala and that fight or flight response is our alarm system. And I feel like by kind of reminding ourselves of those specific choices that we can still make, I would assume calms that amygdala down.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, because I think it's a very human thing to focus on the things that are happening that you can't do anything about.
mm,
That's a very normal human response. We all do that because our brains are wired to look for a problem and to find a solution. Um, and it's our brains have a negativity bias, so our brains are automatically searching for the bad things, and so sometimes it's a real effort to force ourselves to look for, okay, what do I actually have control over here? What can I influence in this situation so that I don't feel so helpless?
hmm, that's good. And I feel like, that's probably in some situations a moment by moment decision. It might be, day to day. And then maybe the longer you go, it might not be as often. And hopefully, as you're working on it, that you're getting some healing and some resolution to some of the trauma. You had said too that trauma is in layers. And so as we are introducing this idea probably to some folks for the first time, and maybe they have experienced um, a lot of trauma through their life, what do you do with that? Like, would you recommend to start with a therapist to kind of dive in and peel back the layers if they're ready? Because I wouldn't even know where to tackle that by myself.
Yeah. Well, obviously, if you're fighting for your life doing cancer treatments, that's probably not the time to start digging into your childhood trauma. But I think if you know this this helpless situation is bringing up that old helpless situation, and that never got resolved, and I just kind of moved on from it, you know that you're going to have to deal with it at some point, and so you just put it up on a shelf until you're ready. But of course, I'm a huge proponent of therapy. And so it's okay to just focus on the current situation and to know that that other thing is there,
Mm-hmm.
or things. Like with me, I had all kinds of old stuff I had to deal with. And luckily, I had already worked on a lot of it in therapy, but that doesn't mean I wasn't feeling helpless all over again. So it brought up a lot of old stuff for me. Um, but everybody's different. Some people want to be really assertive about getting therapy and getting help and working on it. And some people just need time and they have to ease into it. Everybody's got their own pace.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. I love the way you said that. Obviously, I think you're right. In the middle of treatment or at the beginning, that's probably not the best time to dig into the childhood stuff. But I am a proponent too, obviously, of counseling and therapy because you know for me, though, none of this stuff really manifested until I finished surgery and treatment. And that's when I think up until that point, like you were mentioning before, when you go into the fight or flight and how your body's just surviving, I think I was in that survival state and I didn't know it because you're really just doing what you got to do to get it done, stay alive. And then, the emotional part started to catch up. And that's what caught me off guard because I thought that I had done a fairly decent job of walking this out. And then it was like, bam, it like hit you in the
Yeah.
face. And so I just want to kind of bring attention to that. If there are any women who are kind of at that stage where they're kind of struggling now, to know like it's okay in terms of um, really seeing, okay, maybe there's an issue now and that you can go ahead and start to get help now. And that's where I ended up going to counseling. I had put a lot of pressure on myself to try to respond in a certain way and uh, assume that I knew how to handle everything, and I didn't. And that's when I started to seek out help, and it definitely has been a game changer for me, just to walk through some stuff and have a guide. Very, very helpful. So I would encourage any of you guys that are out there today, in whatever stage you're in, that I would hopefully implement some of these ideas that Angie's talked to us about today. Hopefully, it's brought you some awareness of fight or flight, survival state, and knowing that there is a time and a place for therapy. As you know, Angie, I think, is amazing, but she also specializes in a form of therapy called EMDR. We'll probably come back for another episode and talk about that. But I just wanted to say thank you, Angie, for being with us today. I really appreciate you explaining just the basics of trauma. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to email us at info@project31.com, or you can comment on the chat and let us know anything that you might be interested in. And if you have any questions for Angie too, she would be willing, I'm sure, to give us any of the answers and insight that she has to offer too. So thanks again for being with us. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We'll see you again soon.